Right, I think I'm ready to start thinking about my hidden signature, hidden spine for my signatures. Don't worry about me, I'm fine. The first thing to do is to cut a piece of card that's the width of the spine. Into this, we're going to put the holes that correspond with the holes we're going to put in our signature to take the thread through the blocks into this hidden spine. Now, the card is going to be attached to some fabric, and I've just pulled this out of my stash because, look at that, it's the right size. When we sew it in, so I'll be drawing my holes on here, but then I'll be gluing this to here and sewing the signatures onto this, and then attaching everything into the book. So I want the fabric this way up because this is what we'll be seeing, at least the edges of it. I'll put that away for now because I've cut this to the right size. The fabric I can cut down later, but I need to get this glued so it can dry. I will use the, this is a 3-in-1 glue. It's an acetone based, fast drying clear glue. Bit smelly, but it's a nice glue. It's got, apart from the smell, you've got a pretty good working time. Alright, so I will put this, just eyeball that for halfway and make sure that's smooth on there. And then let that dry. I might just trim these little bits off. Doesn't need to be perfect. All of this will be cut, all these edges will be covered. Now I'm trying to decide. I watched a video from Nick the Booksmith to learn how to do this, and I suggest if you want to see a really professional video on putting in a hidden spine, please go and look at Nick's video. I'm sure mine won't be anywhere near as concise or well done as hers. When I watched hers, we made headbands to go, you know, like a traditional book. So it came up a headband when this is in the book. It just comes up over here and sort of protects this edge. It's a very traditional method, and I'm not inclined to do it here. I'm actually thinking that this is very fine fabric, like a cotton lawn. And I'm thinking what I might actually do is simply glue that down there and there so that my cardboard edge is covered. Because I think this is quite fine enough, like that won't have any trouble gluing that. So there you go. That's what I'm going to do. Because I'm lazy. I'm lazy. Well, no, I'm not lazy. I just like to be streamlined and efficient, and as much as I like the look of headbands on a traditional book, I don't think that the kind of journals I'm making benefit so much from it. I think if I can do a shortcut, so it'll hide the card, so you won't see that on the edge, you'll see this on the edge, and to me that's neat enough. That'll do, pig, that'll do. I hope you've seen Babe, otherwise you won't get that reference. I'm not calling anybody a pig. Okay. Now I have to let that dry. When it comes to sewing in your signatures, you have a few choices. A lot of people use the 3-hole or 5-hole pamphlet stitch. Let me get a piece of paper. Don't you love the way, as somebody who works with paper, it can be so hard to find a piece of paper. Here we go. So a 3-hole or 5-hole, let's go 3, but 5 is just 2 extras here. So that's when you come in with your thread in any hole, but whichever one you go in, you then go up here, you skip that one, down through there and back out through here. So you've got both starting and ending threads in the same hole, and you've covered everything here. So when you do it like this, you're basically sewing in each signature one by one, because you'll do 3 or 5 holes here. You'll have your thread either coming out here or coming out behind. Although if you're sewing it in, anyway, I won't get too complex, but that's a very common stitch. However, you do have another option. Well, you probably have a lot of options, but the ones that I tend to use most, what I really like doing is using the sewing machine and just machining them in, because it saves my poor old hands. But for sewing in, so that you don't end up with all these extra threads, you can also, let's write another blank piece of paper, you can also do it another way. And for this, you need an even number of holes. So this is your first signature. And you come in through here, and you just work your way up like this. When you get to the top, you come back down like this and out here. So you've covered all your bases, you've covered each hole like you did in the pamphlet stitch. But then, instead of ending the thread, you loop around and do a little knot here, and then add your next signature, and you do the same thing using this same piece of thread. You weave up and then down and out, and again knot it here, and you keep adding your signatures like that, and you just have one piece of thread, so you have one starting and one ending point. Unless, of course, you run out of thread in the middle, in which case you might have a knot somewhere up here. But it's still, providing you get the tension right, and that's the same for sewing in any signatures, you really need to make sure that your thread has pulled evenly through all the papers, so that when you come to tie off at the end, it's not going to shift around and be really annoying and loose, which many of my first journals were. This method, because you're just using the one thread, it's a whole lot less bother. But I like the neatness of it. You don't end up with this extra bulk in the middle of every signature. You'll still see the stitching, of course, just the single loop on this side, but you won't have your dangly bits coming out the middle, forming a lump when you want to write. So I'm planning to do this one like this. Now the next thing I need to do is to work out the distance of my holes for sewing. But to do that, I actually work with my signature. And we'll open this up. I like to use, oh, it's not long enough. I like to use a piece of graph paper because it's, oh, here we go. It's easier to measure. I mean, there we go, lovely and neat. It's easier to measure your distances. I mean, I don't know. You might be fine with rulers and doing your own measurements, but I find it easier to use pre-existing lines. So get a piece of graph paper or ordinary paper, whichever you like. Oh, look at that. And take it to the height of your book. Okay, so here's a nice even spacing. Now always indicate the top, because even when you try and pierce your holes evenly or draw your holes evenly, there might be a little variation between top and bottom, and it might be enough to throw you out. It's time to sew in the spine, sew in the signatures, and actually get cracking on finishing this little book so I can have more room on my desk. Now, after a rather disastrous attempt to explain how I did this, I think the bit that I filmed showing gluing the fabric to this is fine. The measurements were a disaster, so I had to turn the camera off, have a cup of tea, and figure it out another day. You know, some days it's just not the right day to do maths. Some days it's just not the right day to do anything. Let's face it. Okay, I have 5 signatures. As I showed, I'm going to do 6 holes, the length of the spine, the height of the spine. I've marked these lines, vertical. I marked the top, so I know which way up I'm going. That's important. And I simply found the center point and put a line here. So drew a line down here. Then I decided how much I wanted to come in from each edge, leaving a little bit of a margin. And then I simply found the halfway point between the center and that. So I've ruled these lines. Then using my very messy, ignore everything except the center on this, this I measured on my signatures. Should have made it a little longer actually, and worked out my 6 holes. This is what was so painful for me, because maths. If you do a pamphlet stitch, you just do center and then out from the center to wherever you want your edges to be. So on this one, I found the easiest thing to do was to actually mark these 2, top and bottom, how far in I wanted my initial stitches at either end. So I've got a nice safety margin here. It's not going to tear through the paper. And then I just eyeballed, because that is so much easier than trying to work it out with numbers. I just eyeballed 4 holes and fluffed around until I was happy. You can see a few extra marks. I had to circle the right ones. Anyway, that's my very rough and ready way of doing it. Then I pop this in the signature and use these nice large paper clips, making sure I've got my top at my top. Nice large paper clips to hold that in where I want it. Use a pokey tool and simply start poking. I hope you can see this all right. You poke it not too far through. The further through you poke, then the larger hole you'll have, and the easier it will be to put your needle through. However, you'll have a big hole in your papers, especially in the central one. And, you know, depends. You'll find what's easiest, your happy medium. Then I pull that out and I leave the paper clips in. I previously did these off camera, so they're all paper clipped and ready to be stitched. But now what I need to do is pierce the holes in here. Again, just using a pokey tool. And, so I folded this one up this way, and I lined this up with this. And I marked these. This is where you can see I got into a bit of trouble. I should have glued these after I'd stitched. It would have covered some of the sewing. No, it wouldn't. Would it? Yes, it would. because when we stitch, we're working from this side. So this would just be stitching on this side and the papers are going to be here. So I could have glued these down afterwards. I can see my lines well enough, as it turns out. Lucky it wasn't impossible. I marked the holes here, and then I just used the straight edge of my ruler lined up with this card to come across and mark each of these on each of their 5 dots. And now to pierce. These ones you do want to go through, well, you're poking through the fabric, and I find it easier to come in from the top to get a centered punch. If, like me, you know this is going to hurt your hand, then you need to take it in stages. So I will actually be back when I've finished this, because I'm not going to be able to do it all at once. A rather worse for wear piece of card after all that stabbing, but all the holes are in, and you can see, I can see daylight through them when I look. Now to choose some thread. We've been collecting a box of various threads, and I have actually already chosen this green waxed linen. And I've probably been very foolish. I've got a very long piece here. I'd really rather not have to tie a knot, so we'll see how well this works. I know I always get into trouble when I'm sewing seed beads or hand stitching. I always have too long a thread. I've chosen a nice blunt needle with a large enough eye to thread this through easily. And now let's begin. So here is, oh no, that's, make sure you've got your first signature if you're going to start at the beginning. This is the top, this is the top. We're going to turn it over. We're going to start from the back. I'm starting with the first signature. So I'm starting on the left-hand side, and I'm going to start from the bottom. You can, of course, start from the top if you like. Now, most importantly, and what I failed to do 10 minutes ago, leave yourself a nice long thread here, because you want to knock this off when you come back to it. Now, I think what I might do, no, it's going to get in the way. There. Well, I'll just be careful not to pull through. Okay. So we come up from here, up through here. We're going to come in the bottom hole. Make sure we're the right way up. If it's difficult to pull, please use a pair of pliers. It makes life so much easier. So many things. All right, in through the next hole and out and down through the fabric and out the back of the card. It gets easier, trust me. It's just kind of interesting at this point. I think I do want to clip this. I've got a little clip I'm just going to pop on there so that doesn't pull through, because that would make me cry if I had to do it a third time. Okay. In through the back here, in through your signature, a simple weaving, in, out, in, out, in, out, until we get to the top. And some, some are a bit stiffer than others. If, like me, you're having trouble seeing that, just go through your papers first. And then come down. If you can't find it, poke in from the back where you can see your hole and just widen that, or it pushes the fabric in the other, like this way out, so you can see the hole more easily. All right, phew. We've got these first 3 stitches here done. Now, because this isn't tied off yet, I'm not going to try and tighten the stitches until I get back to the end. So we just work our way back in the gaps. It's very obvious when you're doing it. It's just in, out, in, out. Pick up everything that's on the bench because you've got a very long thread. In through this one. The one thing you do need to be really careful of, especially if you have a thin thread, is to not split it. You don't, and this is why a blunt needle is really important. You don't want this thread splitting through the previous thread, because then you just simply cannot get your tension organised because it's holding it. Ooh. Stay tuned, I might have done it. I'll have to fix it. Okay, we're back at the bottom, so I take off my little clippy. I don't need this much tail, and here's a good way to remember or to learn which way your stitches are going. So this first stitch came up and out this hole, so if I pull on this I can shorten that a little bit. That'll be plenty. And then every second stitch, pull that nice and taut, pull it kind of to the side, not yanking it up and against the grain. Then we've got our top thread, pull that one, then this middle thread, pull that one, and then this final thread. Now you can see these are all nice and tight. Check on the inside. They're all good except for that bottom one. And we're going to tie these together. To hold all of this nicely in place. If that slipped a little bit, like it did for me, I'll just go through again, tie it. And take these off now. Thank you, paper clips. Okay, that does seem a little loose. But I think when what I might do, with a big enough eye. It's sometimes I think making, whether you're working with glass in the studio or paper upstairs, or probably even gardening and cooking, a good portion of it is about actually fixing things that you messed up. So this one's not tight enough for my liking. I'm going to come down through this fabric here and see if I can tie another knot here tighter than that knot there. All right, paper clips out, and it's time for the second signature. If I can find my needle. Down the bottom here, we're going to go in through this next hole at the bottom. And with our signature the right way up, we will do the same thing. Repeat the process. Just as soon as I can see my holes. This may have moved a little. Let's see. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Okay. It's fiddly. So, why I always said I would never do this on camera. And why you're possibly wishing I had stuck to that plan. It's awkward. It's all very hard to keep everything in frame without my head in the way. I hope that's not happening too much. Anyway, you get the idea. I'm just going to continue along this painful journey until it is all done and we can get back to the more fun parts of the process, because this is not the funnest part of the process. It is fun watching it all come together, but boy, this is the time when I think, why did I do 5 signatures? Why didn't I just do a pamphlet stitch? However, I hope by the end we will both see that actually this is worth it. My goodness, that was a struggle. I do hope I can cobble together something that is useful or possibly just entertaining on what not to do. When Q came up, I asked her to try and help me with the trouble I was having with these knots, and she went, "Oh no, you're using one piece of thread," and reminded me that last time we did this binding, which is not so long ago, but wasn't a hidden spine, it was straight into a cover, we decided that there were 2 things that we found difficult and modified after watching Nick's video. One was increasing the number of holes to increase the or decrease the amount of slippery lack of tension. So you can see this is holding really well. But the second thing was, don't use one single piece of thread, because this can be quite difficult. And apparently I selected the wrong thread. She showed me later what we normally use. Sometimes I really worry about my slipping memory. So this thread was slippery, and even Q found it very difficult to tie knots. So I've just gone back through. It's good, it's fine. But what I'm going to do now is open it out like this and glue all of these just for a bit of extra security. So this is PVA, and if I put a nice dab of glue on all of these, then they shouldn't go anywhere. Which also means that now I have to wait until this dries before we attach it into the cover. But that's fine. I'm sure you need a break from it as much as I do. And now we've done this horrible part, the rest gets a lot more fun again. Well, there you go. I should have listened to myself and never done a sewing in signatures. I quite liked my diagram at the beginning. I thought that bit was good. All went downhill after that. Maybe it was these little imps responsible. Who knows? I will see you for what will be the final installment sometime in the near future. Thank you so much for watching. If you have in fact made it to the end, I admire your fortitude. Bye for now.